Hi, thanks for joining me today. Today we're going to cover the 9 distinct motivations described by the Enneagram. The Enneagram is a personality system that describes 9 types, and each one of those 9 types has a distinct underlying motivation associated with it. So let's get into it. So here you see the Enneagram Diagram with the 9 types. And you can see that it can be broken up into 3 groups of 3. These 3 groups are commonly called centers or triads. And you have the gut center, you have the heart center, and you have the head center. And in each one of these centers, there's an underlying driving dynamic associated with it. And for the gut center, that dynamic is anger. For the heart center, it's feelings or emotion. And for the head center, it's anxiety. And each one of these types in a center can have either an external expression of the dynamic, an internal expression of the dynamic, or a suppressed expression of the dynamic, where suppressed means that that type is trying to minimize or eliminate that driver from their lives. All right, let's start with the gut center. And here you have the external, internal, and suppressed. So we'll start with the external anger type 8. Now the type 8, what they're trying to do is to secure control of their environment. And their go-to tool for doing that is anger. So the 8s are using anger to maintain control of their environment. So if you're in a meeting with somebody and you see them starting to raise their voice or get big or pound the table or point their hand like it's a hammer, all of those are expressions of that type 8 dynamic of using anger to get back control when they think that they don't have control. So the 8s tend to be very decisive, and they tend to be very confident, and that's why they often migrate to leadership roles. And I think that both the Winston Churchill and then also Julie Louise-Dreyfus in a role as Elaine in Seinfeld represent that type 8 dynamic. I love it when Elaine will go up to somebody and just push them. That's that type 8 dynamic happening. And that's why they're called the asserter as well. All right, so next go to the internal anger type 1. Now, instead of all that anger that you see going outward externally with the 8, now imagine it's all inside of them and it's focused in themselves. And it takes the form of this angry voice in their head saying, you know that's not right. You know you could be working harder. You know you could be doing better. So that little voice in their head is compelling the type 1 to get it right. And that's why the type 1's often called the perfectionist. Sometimes they're called the reformer or the improver. But it's all about that dynamic of them following that voice that's telling them that they need to do better, they need to get it right. Type 1s are drawn to roles in which precision and accuracy and also principles really matter. And I think that Elizabeth Warren and Mahatma Gandhi both represent that type 1 dynamic well. All right, next we have the suppressed anger. So you remember they want to eliminate anger from their environment. And so they're compelled to reduce conflict. That's what's motivating them, because then they can eliminate anger. And by knowing and anticipating people's opinions, perspectives, and needs, then by going in and working with them, they can minimize any chance of having a conflict or anger. And they tend to be drawn to roles in which they can serve as a mediator. They're not afraid of anger. They'll go towards it, but they'll work to eliminate it. And so that's why they're called the peacemaker. And I think that Donna Moss in the West Wing role represents that dynamic of anticipating Josh's needs and fulfilling them. And then also Woody Harrelson in the role of Woody in Cheers also has that calm demeanor of anticipating people's needs. All right, so now we're moving to the heart center, where it's about feelings and emotions. And again, external, internal, suppressed. So we'll start with external. The external emotion type is the type 2. So the type 2 wants to have an emotional connection with you. That's the external part. And the way that they get that emotional connection with you is by helping you. And when they help you, in return, they get appreciation. And for the 2, appreciation is like oxygen, but it is evidence that that's how they've created that emotional connection with you. So they're constantly helping and receiving their oxygen, their appreciation. So type 2s tend to migrate to roles where they can serve other people, so service roles. By helping people, then they can in return get that appreciation. And that's very fulfilling for the type 2. And who doesn't appreciate nurses? So I think Nurse Jackie in her role represents that type 2 dynamic. And then who doesn't appreciate Santa Claus for bringing us all gifts? That's another example of that type 2 dynamic. All right, next we have the internal emotional type 4. And for the type 4s, they want to just experience feelings. They're constantly reacting to feelings. And so they immerse themselves in experiences which evoke a lot of feelings. Now, the type 4s, if you ask them, how are you feeling? They might just say, I'm feeling fine. But what they're really thinking is, well, I'm feeling the color of the slide. I'm feeling the warmth of the light. I'm feeling the sound in the room. I'm feeling all of these things. But if I told you that, you'd think I'm crazy. So I just say, I'm feeling fine. But that's what's going on in the type 4. And not only are they able to feel all these things that are around them, they can feel the emotional content of everything, but they can also express themselves in emotionally impactful ways and evoke feelings in others. And that's why they're drawn to roles in which they can do that. And those tend to be artistic roles, music, poetry, writing. And I think that both Janis Joplin and Bob Dylan really exemplify that type 4 dynamic. Okay, next we have the type 3, the suppressed feeling. So they don't want feelings. They're not worried about feelings at all. Rather than appreciation like the 2s, or getting that being thought of as having a unique perspective like the 4, what they're after is acknowledgement for their success. So the 3s work hard to succeed. I would say of all the types, type 3s are probably the hardest working. They're going to work all night if they need to. Nothing's going to stop them. And they're doing that because failure is not an option. They must succeed. So they're drawn to roles where they can very easily measure their success and then also show other people, demonstrate that success to others. And they're doing that so they can get that recognition for being successful. And that's why they're called the achiever. And I think the tremendously successful Oprah Winfrey and Jerry Seinfeld both exemplify that type 3 dynamic. All right, next we're moving to the head center. And again, external, internal, suppressed, but this time it's anxiety. So let's go to the external anxiety type 7. Now, people don't commonly associate anxiety with a type 7, but that's what's underlying their desire to be liked. They want to be liked. If they're liked, anxiety goes down. If they're not liked, anxiety goes up. So they tend to be very engaging, charming, talkative, fun. They are doing all this to engage with the people around them so that they will be liked by them. And as long as everybody's having fun and a good time and laughing and merry, then the 7's anxiety goes down. So that's what's going on there, and that's how they alleviate their anxiety. They're drawn to roles where they can do fun, new things with other people all the time. Those are great roles for the 7. And I think both Betty White and Eddie Murphy are great examples of that exuberant, fun dynamic of the type 7. All right, now we go to the internal anxiety type. So that anxiety is roiling around inside. But as long as the 5s feel safe, their anxiety goes down. And the way they can feel safe is by collecting resources that make them feel safe. And the types of resources that make the 5s feel safe are, well, certainly money is a good one, but also information and knowledge. Now, 5s tend to be quiet. So if they're in a meeting with a lot of people, they're just going to be sitting there quietly. But that doesn't mean they're not engaged. They're observing everything. They're taking everything in. They're collecting information about everybody. And that's why they're often called the observer. And they're drawn to roles in which they can collect a lot of information. They tend to be very cerebral type of roles. And I think Agatha Christie and Bill Gates both represent that type 5 dynamic. All right, finally we have the suppressed anxiety type 6. Now, they want to eliminate anxiety, and the way they do that is if they know it's going to happen, then they can avoid risks and make their anxiety go down. So they're constantly avoiding risks. When they sense risks coming up, their anxiety comes up. So they want to find a path forward with the fewest risks. The sixes are constantly anticipating the future, thinking about the future, asking about the future. That's why they're called the questioner, because they'll ask a lot of questions about, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? What happens when this happens? What happens when that happens? Going down this path to try to understand all contingencies to find the least risk path forward. And as they're drawn to roles in which there's a lot of predictability and consistency. So they're perfectly tuned for those types of roles. And the other thing is, because they have this deep-seated anxiety in them, they can at times tend to have somewhat neurotic behaviors. And so those can come out, and I think that the types, both Julia Roberts plays a lot of type 6 roles in her work, and then also Larry David exemplifies the type 6. So thank you so much. Those are the 9 underlying motivators of the Enneagram types. I've enjoyed talking to you today, and I look forward to our next opportunity.